All right, looks like Kevin made it in. He's on my participant list.
Yep, I see him there now.
Okay, so looks like we have a quorum. So welcome everyone to the Parks, Recreation, and Forestry Committee meeting Thursday, August 20th at 6:30. We do have a quorum and the agenda was properly posted. So thank you for that. And we'll start off, item 3 is the public information meeting, master plan for Westlawn 22 Acre Park, community park master plan meeting. And we have MSA with us here tonight. We are excited about involving all of our neighbors and other community members to help plan this exciting park in Westlawn. So if we could try to keep our comments 2-3 minutes, but we want participation, so we want to make sure everyone's heard. So I think we have some engaging things planned. Sean, did you have anything else to say before we turn it over to Dan at MSA?
Sorry, no, not right yet.
Yep.
Jeepers.
Okay, thank you, Heidi. We'll pop in here. I imagine most of you are probably familiar with Zoom, but we'll do a quick run through of some of the items that we'll be particularly using in today's call. First, within the participants section, and when we get to the discussion point, there's the raise hand icon. You can use that to raise your hand, and Shelly, one of our marketing staff here at MSA, will kind of help keep the queue and discussion going on that side. The mute button, obviously, when you're going to speak, you can go ahead and click that. And when it's white like that, that means you're able to talk. When it's red with the line through it, you're muted, which all participants will be muted until we get to certain discussion sections. The chat itself, let the screen load up. There we go. You have the option to chat to everyone. If you have a comment, that's for the group. If you have a question about the meeting itself or kind of getting through Zoom, you can message directly to Shelly Granberg at MSA.
Dan, if I could just throw one in there too, is everybody understand that the chat feature is also recorded. So if you're chatting individually with someone, that will be recorded as well.
Yep. So yeah, and to Sean's point, the meeting tonight is being recorded. It'll be posted with other village meetings on the website and YouTube channel. As I mentioned, all participants are muted until we get to discussion sections. So if you have comments or questions, go ahead and enter them in the chat. When we get to the open forums and discussions, please raise your hand. If you can't figure out where to raise it on there, if you raise your hand in person, then Shelly can also try to help monitor that as well. As Heidi mentioned, keep comments limited to about 2 minutes or so. And when you do speak, just give us your name and where you live, just for the record as well. And with that, I will quick introduction to myself. I am Daniel Schmitz. I'm a landscape architect here at MSA. I work on our Park and Rec team, lead and help out with a lot of our Park and Rec projects, ranging from master plan projects like this one to development and install projects similar to the Bakken Park splash pad that's ongoing right now, which we are working on. I've been with MSA for just over 3 years and have been in the industry for about 12. And with that, I will go through a couple slides. Meeting objectives today, project introduction to kind of why we're here, go through the public survey results from earlier this spring. We had intended to have this meeting back in March or April, but we're delayed with COVID, and then gathering some feedback from you all on kind of how we address and move forward with the plan for this project. We will be circling back in a few months or weeks, we'll see how long it takes, to show the concept of the plan before it's finalized. So there'll be another chance for feedback. Tonight is really to get some high level input and kind of get everyone engaged a little bit in kind of what we're talking about. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sean for a minute.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate everyone joining in this evening. We're here basically to take a look at this 20 plus acre park area and come up with a master plan. Sooner than, we're not really sure when that park plan is going to be available. That's all driven by housing sales, obviously. But sooner than later, we want to take a look at and plan for the 1 acre park. We're calling it right now either Red Hawk or a pocket park. And we will discuss this a little bit more in depth later, just simply that 1 acre area. Why are we doing this now instead of updating our other parks? Maybe some of you are asking, and it's like, the truth is that the land has been dedicated and we need to plan for the future development now. We're going to need to figure out how we're going to pay for the future development, and we will continue to update our current parks and make them as good as humanly possible as we move forward, even while we're developing and pushing through with this master plan.
Thanks, Sean. One other thing I'll point out too is the need for this park outside of the land dedication was identified in the 2018 comprehensive outdoor rec plan that the village put together. So that's the star in the red dashed area was an area that does not have parks. Currently there's less residential development, so the need wasn't there. But as the future Westlawn sections are developed, this park will fill that gap within the existing park areas. And some of the features that were proposed at that time were athletic fields, playgrounds, picnic functions, and shelters and restrooms. So for those who aren't familiar with the exact project area that we're talking about, what we're looking at is a set of parcels. So the main project is the 20 plus acre park. That's the main section between 6th and 7th editions of Westlawn, as well as an existing outlot that's dedicated as parkland and 4 additional kind of wetland detention area outlots that had interest from the village and residents and some additional improvements. So these are those areas. The future community park is Site A. What we'll call either shows up as Pocket Park or maybe Red Hawk Park is Site B, the future Pocket Park. And then Site C, D, and E are existing outlots with detention areas that we're also looking at. Won't discuss in much detail in the meeting tonight, but will be part of the overall report for this project. So the existing community park parcel is farmland as it exists. It actually sits on high ground out east of Bus Road. It ends up kind of overlooking, looking west. You can see the Capitol in the distance, but also have kind of grand views across the landscape as you look that way. This is the kind of approximate view, is looking more east, kind of south. Label might be a little misleading, of the park, and then kind of east and south as well. So as it stands right now, it is undeveloped farmland. And as Sean mentioned, that's kind of what we're here to discuss is what does this look like in 5-10 years when those parcels are getting developed and this park needs to get put in the ground, and how does the village prepare for those investments to put that park in, and what those amenities look like as it goes in. The other parcels, as we mentioned, Site B, the outlot, is about twice the size of the lots in that area. And we'll discuss that one, as Sean mentioned, later on in the meeting here. Site C, larger detention area with some flatter green space nearby, but does abut to the rear of several homes in the area. Site D, this is kind of a panoramic picture looking up the trail that runs through, and as you go north, heads up towards where the larger community park parcel is, and has detention ponds flanking on either side, along with a little bit of flatter green space in between. And then the final site is the southern detention area that joins up to the Glacial Drumlin School parcels, as well as has frontage along some of the homes in Westlawn subdivision. So we started this process back in late February, early March, was with a public survey. That closed back around the 12th. There were 678 responses to that survey. 93% of those were from village residents, so we had about a 9% return rate on the overall population of the village, which is pretty great for a park master plan project. And of those, 77% said they had children under 18 years old, and 70% were within 5 to 12-year-old. So what that tells us is there's a lot of people who are interested, but also have children that would likely have an opportunity to use a park like this and some of the features that may be included. If you're interested in the results of the survey, they can be available upon request if you want to see some more of the full comments and other things. Over the next couple of slides, we'll go through kind of the broad summary of the results from that. So the average age was between 35 and 44, kind of the median age of a respondent, and the largest proportion had lived in the village for 6 to 20 years. So it's a lot of established village residents, people who've lived here for a while or probably intend to for some time, whether because of the current amenities, work, whatever features that may be that brought them here. But providing additional park land and services is something that's important. We looked at where those responses came from. 48%, or the larger majority, came from the northwest quadrant as it was broken down. We used Cottage Grove Road going east and west, and Highway N or Main Street going north and south as the dividing line. And the larger majority of people who responded were residents of the area, and that northwest quadrant is where the park will exist when it's developed. And of those, we also asked how far people live from the park to get an idea of what's the likelihood of the responses that we're getting. Are these people going to be direct users of the park? Are they just interested in the survey? And we found that 41% were within walking distance approximately. And then about 32% of those were within biking distance. So we have over 70% of the respondents would be able to bike to this park, which is a great piece for looking at community park level services. Within the survey, we also asked people to rank and choose the features that they would most like to see within the park. There was a list of about 20 to 25 items, and respondents were able to choose whichever ones they liked the most. Top responses were restrooms, swimming pool, playground, shelters, trails, ice skating. But the way we also broke this down was to look at the type of activity setting that the items provided that we looked at. So the coloring of the bars is specific to that. So purple bars, so restrooms, shelters, parking areas, sidewalks, band shells, our facilities and structures. That came in third for level of importance. The blue bars were athletic and programmed activities, so things like ice skating, basketball, athletic fields, ball diamonds. And then the first most important piece that came in was unprogrammed activities or passive recreation. We lumped swimming pool in there because in most cases, unless it's a lap pool or a more structured activity, I'd consider that just kind of a active rec or kind of passive rec opportunity. You could argue that could go either way, but playgrounds, trails, site furnishings, splash pad, sledding hill, outdoor fitness are some of the other pieces. So overall, the top 15 items that were most important in order were restroom, swimming pool, playground equipment, shelter, paths and trails, ice skating or hockey, site furnishings, benches, bike racks, things like that. Parking lots, so access to the site, basketball courts, sledding hill, athletic fields, whether they're lighted or unlighted, tennis courts, ball diamonds, a band shell, and disc golf course. We did omit from this list splash pad due to the facility opening up Acre Park next year. And duplication of services there, but obviously swimming pools still maintain a high level of interest. And whether or not it's a feasible item to include in this park, I think it still shows the interest that village residents have, and that's one of the reasons why we still included it. And we'll kind of go through some of the character images and things later and kind of discuss some of what these features could possibly look like. Some other comments that we looked at were other recreational facilities that people use outside of Cottage Grove. So what things doesn't Cottage Grove necessarily offer that get used often? And some of the main things that came on that were pool, hiking trails and biking trails, a skate park, ice rink, sledding hill, dog park. We also asked if residents or respondents had safety or accessibility concerns about existing facilities. And a great majority, almost 90%, said no. Those that did say yes typically were related to access to the parks, so trails and other pieces, corridors. Bakken Park, for one, came up as far as access down there with via bike trails and other routes. People feeling the Vilas Park is too dangerous for small kids to cross and get down there. And then accessibility side is having restrooms or toilets for soccer or other activities. And then just some of the kind of other comments that came up and considerations to put into the planning process was eco-friendly and accessible design. So making sure that the impact that this site has is minimal, but still can offer the amenities that the village needs for a park and especially a community level park. Balances the need for civic infrastructure, such as a library or additional park and recreation needs. So some people noted that, hey, we don't have a library, but if we're able to put in some of these other features, it's a step towards getting the amenities that other communities of a similar size or within the region also have. And from there, we're kind of at the interactive section here as we move in. So the activities for tonight, for the community park, we have a set of image preference polls. So we'll kind of go through some images, discuss a little bit of pros and cons of different types of development based on the survey responses that we received. To get some feedback on kind of what items we'll start looking at putting in the concept plan for the larger park. Then we'll have a kind of a little, I guess, a conversation, you could say, on the Pocket Park amenities. We'll do a little background on the Pocket Park site, and then go into some activities on that. And then on your own time, we have set up an online idea board or kind of a sticky wall. You're able to go on there at your convenience, whether you want to do it during the meeting when we're talking about other pieces or other times, as well as share the link with friends and neighbors. It's an opportunity to leave some comments on a few questions that we'll display later on, and those links will be checked until about September 7th. Then we'll pull the comments from there and include those in the overall master planning effort. And then from there, whatever we get through and time we have, we'll just kind of leave open for the open discussion period at the end for any kind of general questions or comments that anyone has. So with that, I will do kind of a quick site analysis for the community park site, just to give you a little bit of background on kind of some of the overall opportunities and constraints that are within the site itself to kind of help guide some of the choices later on for the polls. So soils for the site. The categories that are listed here in the yellow, red, and green are development ratings for structures, roads, paths, and trails. So some of the key indicators of development for structures. What these don't account for, because it would include geotechnical excavation, is rock elevations and depths to bedrock. So some of these may be slightly skewed from what's going to be out there finally, but it gives a good idea on, given this current conditions and slopes, what are opportunities for different development. Majority of the site, that orange block there, is around 2 to 6% slopes, and the soils there make structures relatively easy to build. The flatness of that lends itself well to paths and trails in an accessible range, so less than 5%. So there won't be a lot of earthwork that's required to put in a path network or other features within that area. Also would lend itself well to athletic fields, which the slope analysis here as well shows. So the darker the green, the more suitable it is for development with little to no modification for larger open areas or larger structures. And you can see the green there matches up with this outline, which was that orange area from the previous slide. As you get into slightly steeper slopes, for structures and trails, you might need some modifications to grading to get the features in there. So if you're going to pull the trail down along the section here into the yellow area, you may need to do some grading to make it ADA accessible. But for more natural trails, natural areas, natural open space, those kind of areas are great. So as we start getting into the next phases of planning, those are the things we'll look at as we start to site features, in addition to looking at the relationship to the surrounding properties. So as you can see, the preliminary platting here, which has changed a little bit since this graphic was put together, does have houses backing up to the park. So the considerations for what goes into the park will also need to be considering that as well, that you're going to have fellow residents' backyards up against the park and how that relates to development of features. So again, quick images, just showing what we have to work with is a nice highly perched open space, fairly flat in most areas at the top. And then we'll get into a couple of the polls here. First, just another quick background piece on what a community park is. Community parks themselves are a larger service area. So you'll think of a neighborhood park as your playground. It might have a small shelter and restrooms, or pocket parks, which are usually playgrounds or smaller open spaces, not necessarily a shelter. Community park offers services kind of outside that range and has athletic open space and a larger kind of regional draw. So you'll be looking at things like athletic complexes, aquatic and amenities, walking paths and trails, natural areas, shelters and restrooms, and picnic areas and other passive amenities. So it's often parks that have at least some parking or some other type of transit options, depending on their location. In more urban areas, in a village like Cottage Grove, it will most likely be vehicular or bike traffic that will get people here from the surrounding areas, and depending on the thing they're going to, if it's soccer field or shelter or whatever type of athletic facility that's there. So with that, we'll go into our first piece here. We won't open the poll just yet, Shelley. I'll do quick descriptions of kind of what we're looking at, and then we'll have polls for each one. If there's any extremely urgent comments, feel free to raise your hand and we can try to go through those. Otherwise, we'll try to go through all the poll questions and then kind of touch base at the end. But if you do have something super specific or urgent you want to ask about, feel free to raise your hand and Shelley can let me know. As you mentioned in the earlier section, restroom and shelters were was the highest interest for the park. And what we have shown are two different options. One is a restroom with covered shelter and serving area, so similar to what's going in at Bakken, or what exists at Community Park in different levels of service. And then the other option is more of a standalone restroom. So looking at something that has more of a separation, so you'd have different cost levels that are associated with these. Obviously, maintenance-wise, it's kind of the same. So we'll have, what I forgot to mention, so we'll have this kind of relative cost scale and maintenance. And then in some cases, there's another line for accessibility or flexibility. And those are just kind of relative to these pictures and general development of those items. It's not a, obviously there's a lot of different pieces that can go into cost of shelters, materials, styles, time they're constructed. So these are just meant to be kind of rough comparisons of how expensive these different types of features that we're showing throughout the different polls here are, as well as kind of the maintenance of them. So with that, Shelley, if you want to go ahead and open up poll number 1, we'll just get some input on what people's preferences are as far as kind of the restroom areas. Having shelters attached to them more important, or it'd be more important to have 1 or 2 restrooms that are standalone to make them more accessible within the park. I'll give it about 5 more seconds, Shelley. I think we'll do each poll for about 30 seconds or so.
Should we end it?
Yep, go ahead. So majority figure restrooms with the covered shelter and or serving area would be useful to have. So that's great. So tying that into the next area that we're talking about were picnic areas and shelters. We're kind of on the picnic shelter side. So the different kind of categories and ways you can look at this are covered picnic shelters are your most flexible and most accessible space. You usually have a paved area underneath. The covered roof offers weather and other protection for the amenities. Next level down would be open picnic areas with a paved area. So you'd have calling an ADA accessible picnic area. Picnic table in this case has an overhang for a wheelchair, and then the pavement allows access up to it. And these could be sited throughout the park or in different areas, and that will be part of kind of the next phases as we go on, is kind of where do these items get placed. And then finally, more informal picnic areas, so just really having space for lawns. Obviously, it's the lowest cost because there's basically no cost outside of the green space that you have, but there's very limited accessibility for those who can't walk or otherwise have impairments to get out there. So I think when we go into this poll, it'd be looking at kind of what the preferences are for the majority of the picnicking area, having a preference more towards covered spaces. Some of that would also play off the restroom shelter piece that would cover some of that area, or more informal or picnic areas. So if you want to go ahead and open number 2, Shelley.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Kate.
Where are these accessible? I think this park is kind of off Red Hawk. I mean, are we talking this is accessible through going on, I'm sorry, I'm new to Cottage Grove, but is it where they're building the school? Is that the street? I mean, because my preference is going to depend, because I live on Red Hawk. I don't want people necessarily driving on my street all the time. But if you're going to tell me that it's through Burke or bus rather, then I'm okay with it. But if you're telling me that people are going to be driving on my street all the time to get to these things, that's really going to impact my feelings on this, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the part of the site in the building will be looking at that. So we can, I'll just take a couple steps back here and I'll show the overall map again just to help provide a little bit of description for that discussion for you, Kate. So just take a second here. I think it's probably a good time to talk about this anyhow, so. Nope, one too many, sorry about that. Okay, so the overall park site is there. Red Hawk itself will have it's about a 1-acre park that will be developed, but the main community park itself will have several access points, and siting of the shelter within that will be kind of key to kind of the access to that. So there'll be access from the north. You'll have access from Bus Road more directly, as well as some will probably come up Damascus Trail and over on there. So for the community park itself, I would imagine most likely Red Hawk Trail won't be the main access point, but there'll still be some users on the bike trails and other people walking through the neighborhood that may impact that as well. And as I mentioned, part of the siting and what we'll work on as we get into the concepting and the next phases are finding the appropriate place for a shelter that provides the most access for residents that are coming in from other areas, but also the least impact on the surrounding neighbors as well. So does that help a little bit for now, Kate? So it's somewhat dependent on how this all finally gets developed. This is pretty close to what's shown as the platting. But some of that could always be modified as the development moves along.
Dan, could you go back to the map for 1 second?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So I think most of the amenities we're talking about right now would go in A on the map. And then we can talk about if there's something that we would like to fast track to go in B, C, D, or E.
Yeah,
so,
exactly. And we have there'll be towards the end of the presentation, there's a specific section. We'll do a kind of a discussion on the outlot here. So what that's developed, the idea would be developing that as soon as next year for some of the amenities. But that's partly what we're here to talk about tonight and start the discussion on is what's going to go there and what are the amenities that are most needed in this area. So we will circle back around to that part, but it's later on in the discussion.
I definitely think what you provided helps. Just because if B is right on Red Hawk, then I don't really see that necessarily being a destination. I guess what I'm worried about is being a resident on Red Hawk is just parking and people coming in and kind of taking over. But I mean, I guess it depends upon what goes on B.
Mm-hmm. And we'll show
how it's. Yeah, like you don't want to have a family party be inconvenienced because people are driving to a park. Yeah. You know what I mean? I get it. I understand both sides of it, but just being so close to it, just wanting to make sure that there's no, I guess, issues with that.
And that's, as a pocket park, the intent for development there is much less heavy-handed. So there won't be a restroom with a shelter in that parcel. It just doesn't have the size for it, nor the facilities. You wouldn't have parking and other things within that lot, given the setback restrictions for the adjacent properties. And we'll go through that a little bit more as well. But yeah, so the discussion for these first polls is really looking at the larger park and how those could fit in. And we wanted to get an idea on what the village residents want to include, and then we can kind of start looking at how those get placed. And when we circle around for the next public meeting, we'll be able to have more of a discussion on how that looks, what issues people see with that, where things need to get moved around to best accommodate and least inconvenience the residents, but also provide the services that the village needs as far as park and rec access.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'll slide back through here a little bit. Almost there. Okay, so we're almost back to picnic areas. There we go. So if you want to go ahead, Shelley, as a reminder, we're looking at preference on picnic areas. So picnic areas were one of the higher up items in the list. And what's the envision on what's most useful for that? So as those are open, and I guess part of this is there's nothing that would preclude places from having informal picnic areas if you have open lawn. It's just kind of the focus on what's implemented and if you want to have the other two. So. Let's give it another couple seconds here. Okay, now you can go ahead and. So, this case is pretty even split. So I think obviously that shows that there's going to be some need for a little bit of both, and that makes a lot of sense. It costs prohibitive probably to put in all covered shelters, but also sometimes you don't want that. You don't necessarily need all that space. You might just want to go out with a picnic with your kids, and then having a smaller open space and table is great. I mean, the nice thing about accessible tables is they're another spot you can pull a wheelchair or, a stroller or other things right up next to and keep things close to the edge. So there's other benefits outside of their intended design in a lot of cases.
Dan, we have a question from
Yep.
Chuck.
Sure.
Hi, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was interested, some of these photographs indicate a potential water feature, not a swimming pool, more, pond, natural. It seems like that would be an incredible feature if there were hiking trails and, pond type water features. So I didn't know, given the grade, is Andrew's on here too. Is there any intention of, a pond or water, natural water here?
It hasn't really been discussed yet, and I mean that's a good kind of topic to bring up. If there is a parking lot development and other buildings, there may be a need for some type of detention area or stormwater management, which, depending on bedrock depths and other site conditions, could be expanded to be something that's a little bit more interesting and visually appealing and kind of natural than your traditional kind of rectilinear or kind of oval-shaped detention basins. And the pictures weren't necessarily chosen to show that, but I'm glad you kind of picked up on that, Chuck, and brought that into discussion. So that wasn't specifically one of the items listed as an amenity, but certainly could be. Some of the comments we did see from the open comment section of the poll did discuss fishing and other kind of access to water that way outside of a pool or kind of direct access to water. So depending on how things lay out, it's certainly a possibility to have some type of water feature, whether it's more open water like in B or something like C where it's probably a more natural area with a pond. This looks like it's probably a lily pond. You can have kind of a wetland area, fringe, different things like that can be integrated into it as well.
So I'm sorry, this is Kate again. One more question on these parks and these shelters. Is this something that residents would rent so that offset the costs?
They could be, and that would be more of a programming piece from the village as they look at development. So that's something Sean could kind of work with the Parks Committee as far as like something like A, if that would be reservable, would be kind of determined on the interest of the village at the time they're going in. Something like the previous slide here, these are generally on the reservable side. They offer the interior kind of serving space. So if you have larger wedding showers, baby showers, family reunions, little league picnics, things like that, you'll have an interior space where you can warm up food, wash things off. They're not full kitchens, but offer enough amenities where you kind of feel like you don't have to carry a bunch of dirty dishes all the way home. So it's something that will probably be put in recommendations, but I don't think it's being decided at this second, Kate, unless you have other intentions already, Sean. Feel free to chime in.
If we did a shelter like a big one, then it would absolutely be reservable. But that's why we're here, to figure out the needs. So the B would not be something that would be reservable. That would just be open restrooms for residents and park users to use. So yes, A would definitely be something that's reservable. B, not so much.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. The next one here, I'm sure, is kind of bound to get some interest and discussion. I think it was included as more of a general item. Pools, for reference, I'll put some numbers to these. A municipal pool, something similar to B, if you're looking at something Olympic sized, is usually about $4 million or more. Obviously, a true multi-feature aquatic facility, if you're looking at the big slides in the background, these can range anywhere from 4 to 5 to 12 million. And the likelihood of wanting to put that in a bunch of backyards isn't likely. But we still felt there was validity in including the discussion on this, something, if nothing else, for future reference for the village to determine the level of interest in a pool or aquatic center as the village develops and moves forward, and kind of validating what was in the survey as far as what do people have in mind when you're looking at a pool or aquatic center. Do you want to have more of a multi-featured facility, or something a little more simple that just offers kind of a nice place to go in and swim and doesn't have all the frills and is probably certainly more affordable, and to a certain, relatively speaking, compared to your larger pieces. So if you want to open up poll number 3, Shelley, we'll just take a little bit of interest on this one. Let's go another 5 seconds or so, and then. Well, look at that, we're split again. So this one is a little more far-reaching in its applicability, but it does leave pieces that Sean can have in the Parks Committee for future and ongoing discussions as other potential community park sites maybe are developed in future developments, or even looking at different relationships with other communities as far as access to pools and things like that. Next one, playground equipment. So this is something that will certainly be included within a community park, and as we'll get into later on with the outlot as well. So you have obviously many different ranges of playgrounds. A is showing inclusive playground, so something that's wheelchair accessible. You can see the ramp that runs up towards the structure here, and then has the poured-in-place rubber or unitary surfacing, so it's not something that gets displaced. It's always accessible. It's well drained. Obviously, the overall cost on getting to this side starts to get more expensive. The equipment's more expensive. The surfacing is expensive, but the maintenance goes down. You don't have to go out there, and rake wood chips. The type of equipment has a lifespan that's kind of industry expected, usually about 20 years, depending on site conditions, and the use levels can range anywhere from 15 to 25 typically. And then you have a high level accessibility, so there's a lot of different user levels and kind of access points that get into something like this. Now, you don't have to go quite this far. You could have poured-in-place rubber with a more traditional step structure to be something a little bit smaller. It doesn't have to be the full ramped, but you're still looking at something like that. On the other side would be natural play areas or more native features. So when you're looking at designing these, there are still requirements that you have to meet for safety. So making sure you have the right surfacing underneath different height structures, but there's a bit more flexibility and kind of natural aspect that goes into laying these out, being able to utilize stormwater and swales that can run through and some of the different features that can go into that. Cost is lower because some of this material can be reclaimed from other areas or other projects. Maintenance is higher because it's a lot more free flowing and things can move around. If you do have sand or other features, you'll have to go back out, rake that, maintain it. And the accessibility from mobility access is less, but there are ways that can be kind of worked around and modifying and adding different types of surfacing in. So we'll go ahead and open poll number 4, Shelley.
And Chuck has a question here.
Yeah, you certainly could, Chuck. I think that's whether they're directly next to each other and part of a complex, or having both within the same park in different areas, depending on the settings. So if you had a higher use area, something like an inclusive playground, or including something like a natural area or natural playground in more of a natural area. And that's one of the questions we have on here too, is being able to have both. I mean, it isn't necessarily one or the other, but we did want to get some interest in what people were thinking. What do they feel like the village needs in its next community park more than the others? And if it's both, then the answer is both. And there's probably ways that we can make that fit.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Dan, if I may too,
Yeah, go ahead, Sean.
what I had envisioned for this 20+ acre park is a playground similar to the size of the kids park at Bakken. So something larger that serves the other part of the village. And we do need to think about inclusiveness. As we're replacing our other playgrounds, we're replacing another one this year at Willow Run. We are adding inclusiveness to it and accessibility, but we do need to think about having at least one park in that quadrant that is completely inclusive. So I envisioned this park being that. Doesn't have to be, but we do have to think about having accessibility in all 4 quadrants of our village.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks, Sean. So again, we're kind of split on that majority, and there's definitely seems like there's interest in having some or a good chunk of natural or nature play in some format. But as well as Sean mentioned, there will likely be some type of inclusion of an inclusive playground. Size and all that is kind of to be determined, and even within the master plan as you go through this, we'll provide some footprints and approximate spaces, but the actual projects themselves as they're developed will really dictate what it actually looks like. So there'll be usually another chance to circle back around within a development process. So you'll have the master plan, which will say, hey, we think we want to have an inclusive playground here. We want to have shelters with restrooms, and we'll provide some sizing to that so that we can kind of start allowing the village to budget for these things. But then there'll be a chance to come back through when Bakken's a good example. Started off with the Dream Playground, athletic fields. Now we've added in the restroom and splash pad, and then there'll be some future pieces, potentially Skatepark or other features that are part of the original master plan, but are yet to be developed and kind of planned for. So it'll be kind of a similar piece as the evolution evolves. And in 10 years, if there's features that the village then identifies being needed that weren't identified now, there's a chance to come back to that as well. So it gives a good idea, but it isn't set in stone. So I just want to make that clear, because I don't think we really have shown that. So next thing we wanted to go into, once it was up for me, are trails. So again, this is another one that isn't necessarily one or the other, but would be looking at probably the preference for the majority of the trails. Looking at paved trails, most likely asphalt, slightly higher cost, accessibility is usually high, maintenance is fairly low. And when you go to gravel trails, where there's compacted kind of road gravel or sometimes a stabilized gravel pavement, cost is less, maintenance goes up, have to go out and do grading once or twice a year to kind of clean things up. There might be some erosion. They can be accessible, but it requires maintenance. So I'm going to go ahead and open up number 5, Shelley. We'll get some feedback on that. And if there's any questions as the poll is open, feel free to throw any discussion out there.
So sorry, this is Kate again. You know, I'm an avid runner. I guess my more concern is how these trails are laid out. I don't particularly, as a woman, like having trails that are secluded, and you know, I'd rather be out in the open where people can see me.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's an issue that there's not some weirdo hanging out, or you know, that you're there, that other people can see what's going on. So I guess that's more of my concern, maybe not necessarily the material.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a good point. I'm glad you added that in there. So that's definitely something we consider, and I think that's something that's come up in kind of the overarching kind of theme of park design is making sure there's also kind of looping trail systems as well, so that you have that ability to kind of run through the park. It puts it out usually on the edges where you're out more in the open. So, I mean, either have, in this case, if you had a perimeter trail system, you'd be out along your fellow residents' backyards, but also could be kind of looped through other areas. In this park in particular, the current vegetation conditions are basically nothing. It was corn the last time it was planted and hasn't been planted since. So the opportunities and ability to dictate what that looks like is completely up to the village and input from this process. So I think that's definitely something that we'll make sure is considered in the process, Kate. And Chuck, if you still, I saw your hand up. If you still have a question, feel free to chime in.
Sorry, here again. I'm just asking why it has to be one or the other. You know what?
I didn't intend to. I think I missed that in this one. It should have been an opportunity for both.
Yeah. Yeah, they both have merit.
There'll be some areas where you have a loop or something of an asphalt trail, but you could have some gravel trails, or even we didn't show it on here. It could be grass trails as well, or kind of wood chip hiking trails, and that offers different level of service. Looking back, if you think of that slope map that we showed, the yellow and green map, in the steeper areas, it's harder to put something like the paved trail in and be accessible within typical standards. You can go to some of the other features then. Maybe it's a more natural trail that runs through some of that area, so you don't have a lot of grading and disturbance to that site area. But certainly shouldn't be one or the other. So
perfect. Thanks.
And thank you, Carly. I see your comment in there. I think that'll definitely be something to consider as we look as figuring out areas, what needs to be maintained. We do have coming up here kind of, I think actually the next slide is a good segue into that actually. Looking at open space. So when you think of open space, there's multiple different ways. It can be recreation space, which we will specifically discuss next, but also some of those passive areas that are kind of the in-between. So you'll have maybe you have a soccer field or a ball field or a rugby field or cross field, some type of active recreation activity. But then you may have other spaces next to it. And within those we'll again kind of go into that discussion of what those could be. So you have opportunities for prairie and natural areas to kind of restore things to maybe what some of these sites were 100, 150 years ago, as well as opportunities to have some kind of going back to that picnic question before, something like B could be an opportunity where that comes up, or maybe it's not necessarily the overall goal to provide specific picnic areas, but if you have some open lawn with some landscaping or trees for shade that are near trails or other features, which are kind of shown in that picture, you have the opportunity for kind of a mixed use of what that space could be. You could have small events out there, Easter egg hunt or something that's out in the grass. But not everything has to be that too. Carly's comment is that you don't have to mow everything. You can have some that's more grass or other native areas. So I guess you can go ahead and open number 6, Shelley, and if anyone has any comments they want to throw in for this slide, feel free to chime in. And I think I'll get ahead of maybe Chuck on this one. This doesn't necessarily have to be an either or as well, but it's, I think, a preference on what you'd want to see kind of as the majority. So I think we'll take the results from here, and if anyone has any other pieces to correct me, that we'd have more of the intermediate spaces be kind of open and manicured so that there's able to be flex space, and then having specific areas that are prairie or restoration or kind of more natural areas rather than broader expanses of that within the site.
So sorry, this is Kate again. I've noticed in Cottage Grove there obviously is wetlands. I mean, obviously you can see it along Cottage Grove Road with all the cranes and all that hanging out. Has an assessment been done on this property? I mean, I realize it's farmland, but is it really something that was converted from a wetland? I mean, I feel like the way the neighborhoods are set up, that's to protect homes from flooding, and that's why there's only certain streets that connect from one end to the other, especially in the area that I am in Cottage Grove. So I mean, has an assessment been done that it might dictate that prairie land is probably the better choice in some areas?
The current DNR wetland maps were overlaid in the analysis, and the park areas themselves, none of them fall within conditions. That does not look necessarily at kind of far past history conditions. It's likely to assume areas of lower elevation that weren't disturbed were probably some type of wetland or things in the past. But based on the historic soil conditions that show up in that earlier map and what's on the DNR maps now, nothing within the park itself is identified as a current wetland or likely of a recent wetland. So any restorations and things within this area itself would be kind of within the stormwater management aspect, or because it's the steeper part of the site and there's just no other feature that needs to be put there because we were able to fit other pieces in there. But yeah, so there are no current wetlands within the park boundary.
Thank you.
And Andrew Homburg confirmed that as well. So, and also clarified that there are no wetlands within the 4th or 5th additions to Westlawn either. So the next one we'll go through is related to open space, but more specific to how that space is programmed. You can look at athletic fields kind of in two ways. You can have a multi-purpose field or lawn that really is just kind of an open graded area that's maintained as turf. Could be irrigated, probably not, but does have opportunities, but doesn't necessarily have permanent or fixed features for any one particular sport. Whereas looking at this complex would be more specific design towards soccer. So you have trails and parking, kind of creating a narrow corridor, fixed benches, and the grading for this is probably done to maintain good drainage for soccer, or football or whatever sport that you'd be looking at. Get it open. Oh, ahead and open number 7, Shelley. But we can kind of, again, open this one up for discussion as that's open on kind of what any preferences are based on kind of rec needs that people, that residents feel, if there are any comments. Yeah, about another 5 seconds, Shelley. So, there's a pretty good preference for having more of a multi-purpose field lawn space, which again is another benefit towards the opportunities to have other features there, whether it's not necessarily sport related. If you have other community events or pieces that could also use a larger open space as a lawn, can fit within that as well. So the next item that was on the list was a band shell. Something like A is really kind of starts to be more specific to that type of feature. It obviously could be used as a cover shelter, but has the back area that really in this case is meant just for storage and other features. Looking at something like B would be considering something that's maybe a little bit more flexible, whether it's a specifically kind of designed band shell shape or a shelter that's sited in a way that provides opportunity to become a band shell, offering power or different features so that you can have lighting or events in there, but could be more multi-purpose. Cost obviously a little higher as you go to be a more specific structure, but overall maintenance is usually pretty similar. So you go ahead and open up number 8, Shelley, and any thoughts on this or just in general on inclusion of a band shell within the park and how that would be used? Some of the survey comments were related to music in the park that's currently held at Dublin and how that may be kind of growing past its abilities to be contained within a smaller neighborhood or kind of pocket park like that. So something like this could be a new home for that event or other events within the community. Okay, go ahead and close, Shelley. So the covered seems to be a bit more of a preference, and we'll kind of work towards seeing how that can fit in within the development. So next up is definitely a more specific element, but discussing the skate park, you have kind of the range of features. You have contoured concrete, sometimes called an in-ground skate park, set up expensive, but fairly low cost for maintenance, as most of it's concrete, some steel and things within there. The other is a little more flexible, can be done usually a little bit cheaper, having a wooden or metal structures with the appropriate skate decking on top. But maintenance can be a little bit higher on that because you have to go through, maintain the structures themselves. They're not quite as durable as a concrete basin, but does provide the opportunity that if the space was ever needed for another event, you theoretically could move the skate park itself out of there or change it up in a number of years to a slightly different format. Whereas if you do something like A, you're really stuck into it longer term. So, and skate park came up partly as within the court plan originally, and I guess even before that in the original master plan for Bakken Park, but is something that has come up, but again, as the master plan develops, would probably be vetted by current needs within the village. If something had popped up at Bakken or another park before then, maybe that space would be rededicated to a different activity. If you want to go ahead and open up number 9, Shelley.
There's a comment, Dan, by Chuck.
Yep. So, yeah, so Chuck, I was mentioning it has come up on several polls and within the corp that there is interest. How much and to what extent? I mean, something exactly like the photo in A is probably beyond what is necessary in the village, but it could be done on a much smaller scale if you wanted something in this style. But the option B would be more flexible and certainly more cost effective and able to be put in a little bit more phased. And we start off with the left side of the image with a smaller structure, and if it's well used and the demand is there and everyone's behaving themselves on the site, then you could expand it and make it a little bit bigger.
All right,
so there's different ways to look at that. So
yeah, most of them I'm seeing have been empty. That's all.
Yep. Yeah. It definitely comes and go. There's a very when you talk about removing them from communities, there ends up being a very large. The group comes out very strongly, but again, everyone needs to be able to play well together and have respect of the space and respect of other people's space, and be able to utilize something like this comfortably and feel like they're not judged for being there, but also respectful of the rest of the park users to make those successful spaces.
And if I can jump in quick, Chuck,
Sean.
we do get challenged frequently on providing recreation opportunities for those tween ages, the 12 to 15 that can't drive. Maybe they can just bike and that are not necessarily interested in recreation activities that involve a ball. So this has been, as Dan mentioned, this has been something that's popped up. We're looking, it is in the overall master plan for Bakken Park, which may be a more suitable location for a skate park because it is a little bit more off the beaten path. It wouldn't be right in your backyard. And typically those do have some sort of lighting that goes with that. So really interested in providing opportunities for that age group of kids. But absolutely want to know what you folks think when it comes to what's in your backyard.
Yeah, sorry. I really didn't comment based on proximity to my residence. It was just more cost versus usage. Honestly, that was it. So I can appreciate that tween age group, and that it's good physical outlet. So yeah, that's all. That was really the basis for it.
Thank you.
Well, and what else would that be if you did option B? What would it be used for? I mean, I know we did fireworks this summer. Is that what we're saying? What would be the potential other use, and how costly is it to remove all of this stuff? And
I mean, the intent would be if it goes in, it would probably stay as it is. But in a case like B, something like that could be repurposed as another surface. You potentially could, depending on the base that's put in here, could be resurfaced as a basketball court or possibly tennis courts. There's engineering and thought that would have to go into exactly how that goes together. But there are opportunities. You'd have a larger flat level space that could be used. Maybe some of it becomes a shelter area and some of that concrete would be removed. But again, that's we're taking the consideration and comments and things in as we go through. And ultimately, if this doesn't end up fitting within the park, that's something that can be left off for a different development.
so it's basically not for a temporary removal of that equipment. It would be
Probably more long term, but it really depends how it goes in. I have heard of a few that are kind of temporary spaces, but it still takes some effort, and it would be probably like if you were going to have a larger concert or some type of event where that would really become worthwhile to go through there and kind of unvault all the structures and take everything out.
Dan, there's another comment about the dog park.
Dog park did come up, Dan, and is certainly a consideration for the overall development or inclusion in Cottage Grove, and figuring out if that fits here is still something that we'll be looking into. And Andrew, your comment, lighting for the skate park within the homes would be a concern, and having those in people's backyards and how late that's open till, and obviously in the summer when it's light till 9, there wouldn't be lights on long if it was open to normal park hours, which are usually 10. But as you go into the kind of fringe seasons and you have lights on later and it's darker, that would definitely be a bigger impact. So it's things that we'll definitely be considering as we start to kind of look through how the different elements lay out in the park. Are there any other comments? Otherwise, we will move on to our next section. So Sean, you made a comment about security lighting, not necessarily athletic or long-term lighting. So that is a consideration as well. So it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be lit. It could be closed at dusk, whenever that is as well. With that, we are going to kind of move gears a little bit and get more into the discussion specifically on the outlot that we're calling Site B, or the Pocket Park, and the different amenities that and interest that are in that site. So as a reminder, this is the site that we're looking at. It's along Red Hawk in the current development. I'll show this slide here. It's a couple parcels south of the overall community park. The current guidelines for Cottage Grove development have a 50-foot setback from platted residential lots. So looking ahead, anything that goes in that park likely should be set back 50 feet from the north property line, as well as would be 50 feet from the eastern side there, from the existing home on Red Hawk Trail. And then there would have to be some consideration for what's going to happen in the lots to the west. If that requires a 50-foot setback, that would significantly reduce the amount of developable space within the park, as far as for things like playgrounds and shelters, which is what that setback usually excludes. But overall, the site is relatively flat, and even some of this steeper area in the back was removed as part of the preliminary neighborhood development. So it really is kind of a relatively flat blank slate, and is meant for use as a pocket park in its level of development. So we specifically asked questions about this within the survey, and we kind of held these till now. And these also included the detention area outlots as well. So I think that's probably where benches came in as the highest. But other features were playground equipment, an open park shelter, similar to the image we had in the pool a few back, bike racks, landscaping, maintaining open space, kind of alternatively more of a gazebo style, so something a little bit more intimate than the kind of standard open park shelter, possibly fitness stations, fishing platform or pier, if you're looking at probably some of the outlots and where those ponds are. And then one of the big areas in there was a dog park. So what we did for some context is we grabbed some of the existing elements from Dublin Park, which is a neighborhood park, but offers similar level of service of what this would be, and put those to scale as they would be if you were to fit this in. Dublin has a very long playground, has a large play structure, and then several swings and some ground play elements to the south. And then how it has a 30-foot diameter hexagon-shaped shelter with some additional kind of plaza space around that. And if you were to put those two elements in here in their current sizes, this is kind of what you end up with. So you end up with about 50 feet kind of around the edge that could be open space, and then you'd have a core developed this way towards something like that. And then for some more general discussion, and we'll have a poll on this, but also just kind of want to kind of open up the floor a little bit here for what seems to make the most sense as far as use, is different kind of layouts of what you could fit in these pieces. So if you were to kind of rearrange the elements a little bit, you could do a smaller 1,800 square foot playground. The Dublin playground, I think, is closer to 5,000 or 6,500 square feet. You could fit approximately a half-court basketball, still have enough open space for what could be used as a U6 soccer, so about 60 by 120. And then you still have some area for landscaping and just kind of open space. And this could be just kind of an open lawn like we talked about for those images before, where it's just kind of mixed space. Alternatively, you could omit the basketball court or other feature, put a slightly larger playground. We show a slightly different style of shelter here, but it's generally about the same footprint and square footage, and have a larger open space. This fits a slightly larger U10 size soccer field, so 100 by 150 feet. Shelley, you can go ahead and open up poll 10, but we really just kind of want some open discussion on if there is a preference on either of these two, if there's things that are missing that seem more important or more desirable in the area. What there won't be is there will not be a parking lot, nor probably any type of defined parking for this. This is meant as really a neighborhood amenity. Obviously, anyone would be welcome to use it, but the intent isn't to design this to be a draw, to have people coming in from far away to park. Maybe if there was a rec soccer league that used the area for a couple months or a small season, there might be a few people, but it really be meant more as kind of passive rec space, playground and a small shelter. And maybe this is too big. Maybe it's something a little bit smaller that just has a couple picnic tables under it. Something like this size, 30 by 30, or the hexagonal shape 30 by 30 can probably hold 6 to 8 picnic tables underneath. You could go down to something smaller that has 2 or 3. So
if there was no basketball court put in this park, would it be put in the larger park, or would it be and would this park connect to? Is there a pathway that's going to be planned?
Yep. So what isn't really shown well on here is this small, and I'll use the right side of my screen here. This smaller section of parcel here, I believe, is designated as a trail outlet. So there'll be a trail connection that probably could have been shown in these graphics, but would have a future connection up to the main park as well. So if you had, if you're walking through the neighborhood and wanted to get up towards the main park, you could use this. Kids could run up and down the slides a few times and then work their way up towards the bigger community park. If, say, you have an event at the band shell or something at the larger shelter or other programming.
And you would never consider flower gardens? It all has to be open green space?
Nope. They're just not shown on these graphics. These are just kind of schematic to show some of the bigger pieces. Any of the green space here could be different levels of landscaping. There might, if I'm not mistaken, Sean, I believe for zoning code, there may need to be a buffer strip of landscaping along the eastern side here. Which would probably be some trees and shrubs to provide a little bit of screening to those lots. And there is an existing tree line on the north side, so that would likely be maintained for the most part as those lots in 6th edition are developed in the future.
Yeah, that's correct, Dan. Especially on the east side of the lot, we would do something. The north side of the lot, a few of those trees in there are not of the highest quality, but we would probably look to remove some and replant as well.
And I'm not sure if it's known, but that neighbor that owns that lot has a swimming pool in their backyard. Not that it matters, but for them it might, depending upon what you put in.
Yep. Oh yeah, those will be things that are considered as this aerial is quite old, but that was the only option we had. Chuck asked, has the school land been taken into account and what they intend for that space? We have generally discussed it. We haven't formally, I think, Sean, if I'm not mistaken, I know it was in part of the early discussions as we started this process and set up the survey and things. And I don't think they had their plans set, but have they decided any more? And I guess if you have any more background on that, feel free to elaborate.
Not to the best of my knowledge. In conversations with them, there's obviously going to be a large playground, which will be a fair amount of distance away from Red Hawk Trail. But I've heard rumors of athletic space to the north of the school, but I have not heard anything official.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I think that's critical for determination of what kind of athletic field consideration should be in the 22-acre park, of course.
Yeah, Chuck, I agree wholeheartedly. And once we can get a determination from the school district what they're actually planning on doing, that may change everything as to how we, look at any possible athletic spaces in that 22-acre park. But for the meantime, we can, I want to, and we can do something in that 1-acre park as quickly as next year. We've got money in the budget, so I would really like to get something going in that 1-acre park sooner than later.
Yeah, awesome. And by the way, just kudos to everybody. Thank you for inviting the public to the consideration for this kind of thing. It's very important, especially during COVID. We all are so interested to get outside to a nice space.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chuck. Thanks for taking time to kind of come with us and ask questions, and your questions obviously are we're all being recorded, so this will all be out there too. And I think if there's no other discussion on the Pocket Park, I'll go into a description of what the idea board is, and then we can kind of circle back around just an open discussion. But hearing nothing, I'll move on to the next slide. So what this is, and the link is on the next page, and I will make sure Sean posts to the Facebook page as well, it's an idea board, is kind of a virtual sticky wall. So it's an opportunity to leave comments. When you log in, you'll get a page similar to what's on the background here, and you'll be able to go into the different questions under view section, and the little green plus that's right there will pop up a box like this, and within there you're able to leave comments. So the questions are shown in 2 slides here, but what is also important to note is the little thumb up there is a way that you can vote or kind of reply to other people's comments. So if there's something that's on that board already, when you go in to take a look at it and you say, you know what, that's exactly what I wanted to say, go ahead and just give it a thumbs up, and kind of doubles up that, and we'll be able to see the total on those. So you don't have to rewrite the same thing if you see something that's similar to what you had in mind. But you're also certainly free to leave your own personal comments as well. We have some kind of general questions, and go in, and there's some more specific ones. So they'll be on the next slide. So the link, if you're going into it, is that fun little guy. Shelly just posted it to the chat. Thank you, Shelly. Also, if you're familiar with QR codes, you can go ahead and if you open up your camera, at least I know on iPhones, just having your camera open, if you put it up to the screen, it will see that QR code and ask you to open up a web link. Sometimes, I don't know on Androids if you need an app or if it does the same thing. And that will take you to the idea board as well. As I mentioned, we will check that until September 7th. I believe the link stays active forever, or until idea board closes. But we'll pull whatever comments are there as of September 7th and include those within the public engagement summary we produce for this project. So with that, what are the questions? What we want to get back is what makes a park great. So when you're thinking about parks and places that you go to, what are the one thing or a couple things that you find of the parks you really want to go back to? What are in those parks? What are they developed like? What's the character about them? That type of comment. So it's kind of bringing in some of the individual elements we talked about throughout earlier this meeting, and kind of wholeheartedly figuring out what makes the theme of a great park. So the second question is, what do you usually do in a park? So just what are your usual or typical activities? 3 is, what is the most important thing that could be included in Cottage Grove's future community park? So that's looking at the larger site, Site A, the big 20-acre park. And then the next question, what is the most important thing that could be included in the new Pocket Park? And that's looking more short-term, as Sean mentioned. That's that development could, if there's consensus and a great plan for development, could see a playground or other features as soon as next year. So we really want to get kind of what's the most important thing for the neighborhood or the area, what should go in that lot now or next year. And then 5 is just anything that was mentioned during the meeting that you'd like to share. If there's something we didn't talk about, whether it was results of specific pieces from the survey or other amenities or discussions on park development that you'd like to throw out there. We obviously try to cover a lot in these meetings, but don't have time to cover everything. So if there's anything that you need or would like Sean to follow up with as the village or our team, we can certainly respond if there's specific questions that you have. Otherwise, the comments and things that are put within here will be summarized within the overall master plan document when that's prepared. So we'll probably have a summary of some of this at the next public meeting, which will probably be sometime in November or December, but we'll, same way you heard about this, Sean will make notice of when that is going to be, and we'll make sure to get out opportunity for additional discussion at that time. So with that, we can stick around as we have about another half hour of official time. You're welcome to stay. If you have no other questions, feel free to kind of take off at this time. We'll stick around for a little bit here and answer any general questions we have on any of the particular developments, whether it's site A, B, C, D, or E. It's kind of open floor here for a little bit.
Are all the audio lines open?
I think you can, we'll go ahead and I guess, go ahead and raise your hand if you are interested in talking, and then we'll have Shelley open up just to help keep, kind of keep track and give everybody a chance to fulfill their comments. But and if you don't have anything, that's perfectly fine too. But
Hey, Dan, do you want to start with Chuck?
yep, we'll go ahead. Yep.
Hey, Dan. First of all, thank you. Great job. You know, you mentioned as well C, D, and E. Is there anything you can expound upon for C?
So I think some of the discussions that would come up, and if you're going back to those images that were earlier on, I won't go all the way back through them. It'll take quite a while to get there, but the space there, we saw that comment in the survey about a fishing pier or access that way. In discussions with Heidi and Sean, I've heard there's interest in use of that pond, or it might be D as well, as a skating area. So some type of access, likely benches or something in the green space. These are very tight areas. Obviously, would have to be anything that goes in these would be very respective of the surrounding neighbors. I mean, since it really is kind of a portion of their backyard, there is the trail that comes up and connects through it. But I mean, there's small amenities that the village could offer that could make these great spaces for the dozen or so houses, even that are around there, as well as people that can use the trail and being able to create kind of interesting spaces. Maybe it is putting a small fishing pier, or even if it's just a couple kind of overlook rocks or something on the shoreline there that makes a nice spot to be able to cast out into the pond, or creates a good spot in the winter to step down onto the ice or something like that.
Awesome.
Those are the types of features that I think we're looking at for these, and that's why we didn't devote much time within the meeting itself to those, is knowing that there's not a ton of options for what's going to go in those, but to provide opportunity to say that there will be something possibly, and to what extent that is and how it's funded can certainly be a discussion between community members in the village, as far as what types of benches, or maybe there's a small gazebo or a little shade in the one in lot C or D, and how that kind of fits in with the overall. Maybe there's like a bench off the path on E, so you can come up through as the Pendulum Trail gets developed over the school site, and there's a spot to stop.
Yeah, a pier would be awesome. I just think it'd be fun. Thanks.
Yep, you're welcome.
And do we need to have these comments documented with first, last name, and address?
That would, I guess, should have.
So that was Chuck. You didn't want to state your.
Absolutely, 3006 Red Hawk Trail.
Okay. If there's anyone else who spoke up during the meeting, if you don't mind just popping back in to state your name again and your address, that would be appreciated.
And Andrew has his hand raised too, if you want to go next.
Yep, I will go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead, Andrew. Oh. Unmute. Got to do that first. Are you able to unmute him, Shelley, or do you still need to speak, Andrew?
Andrew, you should be able. There you go.
Okay, everything I just said, no one heard.
Sorry about that, Andrew.
No, that's me, technological idiot. I just wanted to offer some historical perspective. When we were platting the 4th Ave to Westlawn, it was purposeful in creating the path system that went from the southwest corner up to the northwest corner in the absence of a road coming up the west side of Glacial Drumlin School. We wanted to create connectivity within 4th Ave and utilize the ponds that were being used for stormwater detention and management as a natural resource feature. So, to Chuck's comments and the others that were made about natural landscaping, natural playgrounds, I think that the areas off of C, D, and E, even B, along the fringes where your setback is, could be utilized for those more natural type of features. And those were the things that I was thinking of it when we created these spaces. There's the 1 acre pocket park B that I always envisioned as similar to Strauss Park over in our South Lawn neighborhood, for those that are familiar with that. And then in area C, there's about a ½ acre west of the pond that's relatively flat that connects the pond to the 8-foot asphalt path. And ideas were thrown around about possibly a bocce ball court or a fire pit where neighbors could gather in the evening and share a story and a beverage. The Philosopher's Stone down at UW campus, our construction arm of our company built that using natural features where you gather around in a circle and maybe tell stories or do readings. Small scale interactive spaces for the residents of the neighborhood that I think are at a scale that's appropriate with these spaces. In area D, there's a crossroads where the path bisects the east bay and west bay of the middle ponds. And at that quadrant, at those crossroads, we had envisioned, again, Sean and I had talked maybe about some exercise stations there, where you could stop along this path as you're moving north-south towards the major park. And when I was young in Winnequa Park in Monona, they had something like that. They were wood structures, and unfortunately they didn't hold up very well, but it was pretty cool. You can go throughout the community connecting on the path to these features. And even down in area E, and I wanted to give an update on that. We are, in conjunction with our partnership with the school district and Findorf Construction, we're building a path that connects off of the southwest corner of area E over to the new 3-5 elementary school. And that'll be completed and paved this summer. To the east of the small infiltration pond that sits behind the Zotkowski family's home and the Solani family's home. And there's new folks that just moved into the third one. I don't recall. I haven't met them. But exactly where Dan's highlighted, there's a small 1/4 acre area. And that might just simply, again, be a couple of benches or a tree, but a place where people could stop along the path and intersect with their neighbors. So, I love what I'm hearing. It's very consistent with what our vision was for this area. And I'd love to see budgeting and implementation of something in all of those areas that are filled and built within 4th Ave as we move towards the large future park.
So as a resident who has my backyard butting up right to sea, right in the area, you had at one point sent out a survey about an athletic park with these bright, ugly blue structures that I absolutely said, no, I don't want those in my backyard. I think whatever you do decide, do keep in mind that it is somebody's backyard. I would rather see a fire pit in a garden, hands down, before I ever saw an athletic structure where to me, I felt like my privacy of my heart is in doubt. That I couldn't go out there because maybe people were out in that area. So I think whatever you decide, just keep that in mind that, it is somebody's backyard. Just like I said, my neighbor has a pool right there where you're planning the 1 acre park. So, they built that pool knowing it was going to be a park, but maybe be respectful of that resident, I guess.
Kate, do you mind just stating your full name and address for the record?
Kate Hilson, 3012 Red Hawk Trail. I'm right along the concrete path.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Yep.
If you don't mind, I have one other open question. Is the future community park, the 22-acre park, Andrew, dependent upon any completion of all lots sold in 5th and 6th phase?
So it absolutely is. COVID has obviously changed the world as we know it.
Yeah.
And the market and absorption rates and sales will dictate how quickly we can move through 5th Ave and into 6th Ave that will incorporate probably 14 out of the 20 acres. And I just want to correct, it's 20.26 is where it sits at this point. And as a point of reference, 14 acres would take you up to roughly where the fireworks are staged from in July. That's kind of the peak of the hill. And then it rolls off the ridgeline as you go north, sort of the top of the A as you look at this image that Dan's got on there. That's about the 14 acres. So I think it would be prudent to plan the southern 2/3 of this first and look at that northern third as the last phase of the community park, because that's likely in the 7th edition, which would be a number of years away. I wish I could predict how long it'll take for 5th Ave to build out. That's 100 single-family lots. Presently, I have 2 sold, 2 under contract, a couple more kicking at the tires, but it's obviously not where we'd hope to be nearing September of 20. But that's the nature of the world today. And as much as we'd like to control timelines, I simply can't. Our drive will be to the west. Before I develop the eastern 20 acres, there's 41 lots on the eastern section of 5th Ave, basically from the large 2.1 acre basin east, that require a lift station and a sanitary sewer force main. And I'm going to defer that to the future so that we can drive ourselves west towards the park and Bus Road and connect with whatever it is that the school district does with their northern 30 acres. We may develop that eastern edge of 5th Ave concurrently, but I specifically asked the village board and the village planning commission, do you want our drive to be north to Gaston or west to Bus? And the answer was west to Bus, in part so that we could have connectivity to this park. And there'll be a continuation of the 8-foot asphalt path that comes up the west side of Damascus along the north side of London, which is the primary east-west road that goes all the way to Bus, which will then create connection to the future community park. And that would be the primary pathway, Kate, to your earlier question about whether people would be coming down Red Hawk to get to that future park. Some will, but when it's all built out and said and done, I believe Damascus and London become the more primary path. Bus in London, Damascus in London. Exactly, Dan.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Any other comments or statements, questions? Got a couple more seconds. If not, that will conclude this section of the meeting. Thank you all for attending and your interest. Let me go ahead and actually show the final slide. If you have specific questions about the project or to get involved, go ahead and send an email to Sean at villageofcottagogrove-grove@wi.us, and he can add you to the project mailing list. So when we do have additional updates or the next meeting comes out, you can make sure that you're on the list to get updated. Take a look at Facebook for updates. And again, the link for the idea board is included here as well. So please feel free to share that with others who weren't able to make it tonight, but may still have input on this project.
Yeah, I would echo what Dan said. And for those of you that are still here, let's get this out. Let's get we want all kinds of ideas, all kinds of involvement, as much as humanly possible. So let's share this tiny URL and make this the best part.
And Sean, I think would be good too is to share the link to this meeting recording on the Facebook page once it's available. That way, if there's people who want to go through and see the whole process, they can sit through as much of the hour and 15 minutes here or so as they'd like, but kind of fast forward if they need to and see some of the other comments that we had. With that, the Park and Rec Committee meeting is going to reconvene at a separate link that Sean is going to send out. So if you're here just for the public meeting, that is ending now. So feel free to go enjoy the rest of your evening, and thank you again for your time.
Thank you very much.